To teach or not to teach Shakespeare? That is the question we're tackling today. Welcome to the Brewing Literacy podcast, Conversations for ELAR Educators. I'm your host. My name's Raven. I have a special guest today. Her name is Catherine.
Hello.
Now, she's awesome. I've taught with her. In addition to teaching with her, she's taught theater, taught English, and so she is the perfect candidate to join us in our conversation about Shakespeare today. And the special thing about this podcast, why we call it Brewing Literacy, is that every episode we have a special coffee drink. Today's coffee drink is a Bard's Brew. It is a pumpkin white chocolate mocha. Cheers.
Cheers.
So let's jump right into this. First off, let's start here, because Shakespeare is such a big topic. There are so many nuances of the Bard. So let's start here. Do you like teaching Shakespeare? Because a lot of people don't.
I like how I teach Shakespeare, and so we'll get to that later, but it's definitely one of those hurdles that once you do it, you feel really good about yourself if it went well.
Yes, it's definitely not easy.
No, not at all, especially if you don't have a theater background.
For sure. I was actually really surprised when I first became a teacher. I just thought, it's just that common assumption, if you're English, you love Shakespeare. I was surprised at the number of teachers who were like, absolutely not.
It's also common for, if you're a theater teacher, you must love Shakespeare, and I didn't. So
interesting.
I like the shows I like, and I like the sonnets I like, but sometimes it's a bit of a bear.
For sure. A bear for sure. And I agree with you. I'm like one of those people, I love teaching Shakespeare, but I think it definitely depends on the way you do it, right? And so that's what we're going to talk about. So in addition to us liking teaching Shakespeare, the interesting thing is whether teachers like it or hate it, most curriculum requires it. Shakespeare continues to be that hill that English teachers will die on. So what do you think is the purpose that we still teach Shakespeare?
I think it's a lot of historical relevancy of where words came from. That's at least the door that I come in through it. We didn't have dead as a doornail. We didn't have to vanish into thin air. There's a lot of what we use now that we didn't have until that period of time happened. There was also this really big renaissance that happened at the same time. There was a lot of historical changes and law changing during this time.
For sure.
So I think it is still relevant to show where we have come from so they understand where we are now. Also, just to keep that cultural aspect of one of the things we'll talk about later is about it being relevant still.
Yes.
Is there's so many themes that still connect people to this day because it's just being human.
Yes.
So, but there's this beautiful with the meter of it. There's that iambic pentameter, that heartbeat that keeps going through it that kids don't get out of modern day unless you can relate it to like rap or any kind of popular songs that they have where there's that beat and they don't know why they like it, but they just like it. So I try to tie it in that way.
That's a very good way to do that. And I agree with you. It's everywhere and it's part of our culture. One of the articles I read when researching for this podcast, it was called Why Teach Shakespeare Reconsideration. And the author says in there that Shakespeare has more quotable quotes than any other book in the English language. And so I think that that's another purpose that we teach it. I feel like we're doing students a cultural disservice, because whether they like Shakespeare or hate Shakespeare, they meet it in the real world. It's quoted everywhere. And like you said, dead as a doornail, weird phrases like that we didn't have before. Funny enough, when I was doing research for this podcast, since this is my first one, I looked up should you make a script for a podcast? What should that look like? And it was a video on YouTube, and the first thing the lady said, she said, to script or not to script? That is a question. I'm like, oh, Hamlet,
Yes.
It's everywhere, and we can't escape it. So when you taught English, how many times a year would you teach Shakespeare? What was in the curriculum?
So we had a little bit of control over when we hit it. Normally we would hit it towards the end of the spring semester. It was after our big test of the year, just because of, unfortunately, the constraints of you have to teach all this on a test, which is my least favorite part about teaching was teaching to a test. Sometimes we only got 3 weeks, 2 weeks in English world.
Yeah.
I wanted 4 to 6 weeks because with the time restraints, you can't actually do a whole play. You can't read the whole play. You can't watch the whole play. So, and Shakespeare was meant to be watched. It wasn't meant to be read. So that's, I think, one of the hardest parts about teaching Shakespeare is the reading part.
I agree 100%. And the thing is, like, you're right, because we have such, I feel like teaching English as a high school English teacher, you just feel like you're sprinting. You know, like, oh, I have to do this, this is going to be on the test, the state test and all this. And similar to you, we would save our Shakespeare unit for after the test. And I remember one year a teacher wanted to move to the beginning, and I was like, no. Like, I want students to enjoy this, and we'd have to go through it so fast if we did it, you know, the first quarter of the semester. So we did it at the end as well. And it's unfortunate that we only have like such a short time, because it is such a big, like, he's such a big persona, and it's not just the plays, it's all the background. Like, part of my favorite thing to do when teaching Shakespeare is talking about the Elizabethan era. Like, students love it, and they're so shocked. Like, they're like, they did what?
Yeah, I would have a tea time with tutors, and so I would start with King Henry VIII. Like, I would give them, because I mean my son's name is Henry, so I would give them all of the bloody, gory details, and then get into, you know, Bloody Mary as well, and then comes Elizabeth, and then comes this rebirth type of time with the arts. And so yes, I love teaching the history component of it, and about the plague, and about every time that the playhouses had to be shut down, and why would that happen. And so yes, I think the cultural aspect of what was going on at that time is really eye-opening for students.
For sure. And they really, like, I think sometimes teachers think, oh, they don't care about history, but they really find it interesting, especially because it's so far removed from anything.
Yeah.
You know, like, we talked about that they used to brush their teeth with sugar because they thought that was actually helping them. And it's just, you know, interesting things like that in that time period.
I think it all has to deal with the teacher. If the teacher likes 100%. Shakespeare, if the teacher likes that time era, the student will like it. If the teacher just has to do it to check a box and they don't really like it and they stumble over everything, the kid's not going to have a good time with it. You're setting up a really poor foundation for what they're going to build on, because it's not just 1 year that they're taught Shakespeare. It's hit every single year. So
every year. And then if they go to college, when they have to take a literature class, it's probably going to be there as well.
Well, and heck, it's even on The Simpsons. Like, it's quoted everywhere. So as you said, from the article, the most quotable person out there, they're going to find it. It's going to be out there, and you want them to be like, I know what that is, rather than be in ignorance.
For sure, for sure. And I agree with you. I kind of, like, it's normal for students to have pushback and not want to read something, and they have these preconceived notions of Shakespeare. So when, you know, they, as a freshman, they come into my class and I say, okay, guys, you know, we're going to start Romeo and Juliet. I see the little scared looks on their faces. But I think that it's our job as educators to fix that. And so, you know, I kind of think, other than that initial pushback, if the student leaves the classroom hating Shakespeare, I kind of blame the educator. Like, what are they doing to do that?
And it's all about the setup too. Just like a movie trailer, you don't want to give away too much.
For sure.
But you want to get them hooked in. So one of the things I ended up doing for one of my segments was I put up a whole bunch of scenarios on the board, and I said, you can only pick 3. What would make the best story? So it's like haters to lovers, or family feuds, or war, or like, I would just have all these random themes that are throughout it. And I said, you can only pick 3. And so they kept picking 3. I said, guess what? They're all in this. It's called Romeo and Juliet. And they're like, what? So then they're excited. They're ready for it, because they want to discover those points later on. So it's really about the buy-in. So even if you weren't super comfortable with Shakespeare, because he's a lot to swallow.
For sure.
If you set it up in a way that makes you feel like you're discovering it too, and if you try to find those little nuggets every single time you teach, because he's so massive that you're going to find new stuff every time.
100%.
So why not look at it that way? So yes, I think it does boil down to the educator of, you know, you're going to have to tackle this bear. How are you going to do it to where you are still invested enough to get them invested? So.
Yes, that's so important. There was an article I read called Shakespeare in the Common Core, an Opportunity to Reboot. And one thing that really, like, stood out to me was they were saying, like, our ways to teach Shakespeare cannot be antique and outdated. And I think that just is what contributes to the overall feeling of dread towards Shakespeare. So what are some other reasons that you found that your students, when you mention Shakespeare, they roll their eyes and they hate it?
the lack of relevancy to their daily life. So this was all like kind of preconceived notions. Also just he's long.
Oh yes.
And if you're reading in the original text, it's hard to follow. Even for a theater major, it's hard to follow and get in the right rhythm. Again, needing to be watched. It was never ever meant to be read.
So important.
So I think it's almost like we're almost set up for failure at times because we're like, you have to read this play. It's like, no, I'd rather you hear it. Or can we say it in the modern day telling? And I used to be it needs to be in the original text until I taught it. And then I went, oh, no. They're having a blast, but it has to be in more of a modern day translation. And there'll be times where I say, can we pause and just read this in the original because it's so beautiful. Or it's funny, or like the beat is fun. And they're like, wow, that slaps. I'm like, yes, I know what that means. That is cool, isn't it? You know? So it's, and even that with their words changing all the time, I'm like, here it is. Here's another big change, and now this has shifted to what this means. And so just seeing the vernacular change and teaching them what vernacular meant and about colloquialisms and about just like parts of their world, that how you can have one word for one thing and it's a completely different thing somewhere else, like soda and pop. And then showing them a place where it was very relevant as well, and how he kind of solidified some words, yet we're still able to use it and translate it now too. So I actually saw a different version. I think it was All's Well That Ends Well, but there was a woman who was deaf and she was able to sign it, but as it is so wordy, she had to almost work with several other colleagues to make it into a Shakespearean sign.
That's so cool.
Seeing that shift happen as well, but watching her make up words, but it just made sense of what was going on in the scene. That again is another translation, a modern day translation, and being able to see it again rather than just hearing it, rather than just words, rather than just reading it, but seeing her come up with her own gestures. You're like, I absolutely know what they're talking about right now. It's getting to the core of what he was meaning. So yes, I think that there are a lot of pushbacks because of length, because of I don't understand what they're saying. Why are there so many words? And it's up to the teacher to translate, or to a text to translate. So if you don't have the translation, they're not going to see the importance of it.
For sure. And I think too is like, I mean, even like as an adult, if I'm looking at something, I don't understand it, I just get frustrated and I don't want to do it. And so I think we also like have to teach them, hey, it's okay to like not understand, but there are things we can do, like different translations or watching it to help us with those. Absolutely. One year when I taught freshmen, we always read Romeo and Juliet, which is my favorite one to teach. But one year, something we did, we paired with the theater department at our school, and they like, before we started our Shakespeare unit, they had their drama class do all these little episodes, different scenes from Shakespeare, and it really like helped the students to visualize it. And the theater teacher said something that I think really helped my students. He was like, you're confused when you read Shakespeare, so were the people in Shakespeare's time, because Shakespeare made up so many words. Like he was a wordsmith. And so it's interesting, like reminding students like, hey, you're confused, but it's not just because everybody back then was like super understanding. Like they were confused too. It's normal, but there's still beauty in it, and let's find it. And
it's still a staged reading. It's still a staged way of speaking. And students are like, do they really talk like that? Well, not really. This is still a theatrical, spruced up, make it pretty,
like a musical on Broadway. We don't break out singing. I mean, some people do.
But yes, absolutely. Teaching them where is the truth, where is the magic of the theater, because it definitely is woven in beautifully. It's so hard sometimes to separate.
And I know earlier we said we were going to come back to this, so we're going to come back to it now. Relevancy for students with Shakespeare, because I know it's, Shakespeare's written so many years ago, and it's like the students like, it's funny because they read Romeo and Juliet and they're like, these guys are stupid. What do you mean they're 13, 2 days, gonna fake a death? And like, that's just stupid. And it's like, have you seen you and your girlfriend from second to third period think you're never gonna see each other again? So how do you connect the relevancy?
So telling them in that modern, just talking to them language of like, here's these two families who don't get along. And then going off from there of, then he falls in love with her first sight. Yet 2 moments ago, he was wanting to die over Rosalind. Like, come on. And so, like, being able to put it into homeboy over here, yes, he's head over heels in love. Have you seen all the Disney movies where it's like I'm in love? But honestly, it does happen still sometimes, rarely. So being able to show them piece by piece, like, here's one guy from one family, here's a girl from the other side, she's supposed to marry this guy. Wait, is that his cousin? Yeah, it's a little incesty. And they're like, what? So getting them hyped up over the I don't want to say oddness of it, because most of it is very, very relevant to them, but getting them excited about the weird and excited about even in Greek mythology, like whenever I talk about Zeus, like everyone's like, yay, Zeus. I'm like, no, he is the biggest player out there. Like, yeah, player. I'm like, no, incest, no. And they're like, oh, wait, no. I'm like, yes. And so then they're like, wait, isn't that his sister? So like being able to come at it from them, because back then it was technically socially okay to marry your cousin and keep the money in the family. And so being able to have those discussions then makes it to where they want to learn more, because they want to follow it literally is drama. They want to follow what is dramatic. And so getting into
like a juicy love story.
Yes. Well, and then like, oh, they're dead. They're like, what? He's dead? I'm like, yeah, he's not getting back up. That was a sword fight. No.
He's done.
Yes. And so being able to kind of follow that, and I'm like, wait, why is her dad mad at her? And then why isn't the mom standing up? I'm like, back then women couldn't. And so being able to, again, that historical relevancy of this is how it was, see how far we have come, hopefully how far we need to go. So then they're able to see like, oh, how much fun it is. And like, wait, is it common to talk about her like blooming like a flower? And she's like 12. I'm like, yeah, she is.
Awkward.
She is. But at that time, life was shorter. You know, they didn't live a ripe old age. And so they had to get going quick. And so, you get to enjoy your childhood as a childhood, please do. So having those fun but needed, necessary conversations, that's how I get them hooked in. How they should be hooked in. Even an adult. You want to know, you're like, what? That's wild. I want to know how does that end, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I always say, like, when I would tell people, they would ask me, like, oh, what's your approach to teaching Shakespeare? I would say, I think, like, that first lesson is the most important, because I've got to establish the relevancy. I've got to establish the buy-in. I know one year for Romeo and Juliet, and it cracked me up, because, you know, they're freshmen, so their responses are so funny. I told the students to make a T-chart, and I was like, okay, on the left, I want you to write down all the characteristics of your perfect person in the future. They're like, Miss, why are we doing this? And I'm like, no, trust me. And I was like, okay, now on the right, write your parents what they want for you know, your future. And then I was like, are they the same? They're like, no. And they were just, you know, completely grossed out at what their parents would want versus them. And I was like, okay, now we have set the stage for Romeo and Juliet. Like, you think it's crazy how fast it moved, but it was just differences. So I think that's really important for students. So moving on from students having an initial fear or worry, anxiety about Shakespeare, because it is a big cumbersome text, and then talking about the relevancy. What about teachers? Because as much as I love teaching Shakespeare, it's one of my favorite things, it was pretty stressful. So what do you think are the difficulties for teachers when trying to plan Shakespeare? We talked a little bit about it, but planning Shakespeare for their unit.
I think they need to have a realistic understanding of the time needed to do 100%. It well. So if they can think, okay, I have this hook that's here, I want a whole day just to hook them in, but then you have a 5-act play in front of you that you are trying to hit. What we did was we had to look at it, and you have to have a very thorough knowledge of the piece you're working with. You need to know the length. You need to know the main pressure points, as you will, for them. So you need to know when does this pivotal moment happen, or are they just talking wind for a whole scene? You can skip over some of it, and some people are like, oh no, you have to teach the whole thing. You're gonna lose them just like you lose an audience. Right now you have to shorten to be able to get the biggest impact, and you can revisit, or you can get them so bought in that they'll want to read it on their own. So, or you can say, this part's too risque, we have to skip this. They're like, what? I have to read it. So it's all about how you approach the text. But if you don't know what you're working with, you cannot teach it. So you have to find a way for you to be bought into it, to where you look forward to teaching it, so you can also spend enough time to make the right impact, to make a long-lasting impact, where they can then bridge up year after year, because they're going to have to. So I would say most of the pressure is down to the freshman English teachers.
To build that love.
To build the love, not hate relationship, to get them excited to want to read more or watch more. But also so that they know what they're talking about the next year.
For sure.
And yes, there's going to be a level of reteaching, because we all forget things as we sleep. But I think that knowing what your material, understanding the time commitment, not rushing where you don't have to rush.
Yes.
Find places to pause. Find places to let your students act it out. And I know that a lot of students don't like to speak out loud. Hopefully by the time of year that you're in, you have established a safe space to where they feel comfortable coming in. And then, so it's also down to the cultural dynamics of your classroom, but allowing them to read it, and also allowing the modern text to be there. So we would have the No Fear Shakespeare, where you have the modern day translation on one, and you still have the original text on the other, so they can see the differences. You have time to pause, to dive into the text. We also would find time to weave in the sonnets, so that, like with My Mistress's Eyes Are Nothing Like the Sun.
My favorite sonnet.
And I was just like, oh, y'all think that sonnets and Shakespeare is all lovey-dovey. He's about to roast her.
My favorite sonnet to teach.
But he still loves her. Aww.
It's so beautiful, the theme of it.
Yes. They're like, he's saying what now? They're like, man, she's ugly. I'm like,
is he?
Yes.
That's what they say.
I'm like, yep, that is a modern day translation. You write that down. So as long as you are able to pace, it's your pacing calendar, honestly.
For sure.
If you're able to have investment, right, get your hook, and then know your content of how long you need for that whole piece, and where you're going to splice in where you can get the original text in there, because you can't just do only the modern translation. But then you have to have time to watch it. You have to. You have to, even if it's watching just scenes. And I love incorporating in where thankfully, we think of COVID being one of the worst times. We were able to get a lot of recordings out of that time, where we haven't been allowed to before then. So being able to look up your free resources on with the Globe Theater. And this is another reason why I teach in the spring, is that around his birthday death day of April 24th-ish, or April 30th, whatever. I think it's April 24th, 23rd. Somewhere near there. Yeah. But they run free resources during that week as well.
Oh, that's fun.
So being able to tap into, like, it's all about your calendar, but being able to tap into that time and make it connect right then to your resources, you're able to see what have grown adults done with this. And it's on a reconstruction of that real stage, and being able to show them the parts of the stage. You need to teach them theater terminology at that point too. So you need a chunk of time. You need like a 6-week period to really do it right.
Even I think with my schooling K through 12, we would read one little play a year, or a little, they're not trained to for the drama. And a lot of them, theater is not, that's an elective, so most of them don't take it, so they don't know. Okay, we've talked a little bit about it, and I know your thoughts, and it kind of aligns with mine, so I'm glad on that. But it's a big controversy about modern translations, and it's when I first started my first year teaching. My students, I had a lot of inclusion classes, so their reading level was just not ready. And an AP class reading level honestly isn't right. My reading level sometimes is struggling for, the Bard. But, so I feel like lucky enough, we had No Fear Shakespeare translation. And at first I felt really guilty, because and it was just because that. I
feel like you're cheating. Like you're taking a shortcut. Yeah.
Yes. And I just could hear this snobby English person in my head oh, I would never. You're ruining the magic of Shakespeare.
No, so yes, that is a struggle. Yes, I have that same snob in my head. However, I combat them with, if you want them to like it, you have to make it to where they can understand it.
Yes.
And so since they're, again, reading it, not seeing it, they have to have help. I have to have help being able to get them to digest it. Because if you think of, you have this 4-course meal in front of you, how are you going to eat it? One bite at a time. But also, you're going to have palate cleansers. So that's what I see the translations as, even if you find like a fun rap version of something, you know, and being able, or like it's like the bard versus, you know, like if you make it funny, add in levity, even if they're speaking in a meter, you're able to help them understand it because they're hearing it. So if you're reading it, you have to have help. And with that, I say splice in and stop where you can to add in the original text, but stay predominantly in the translation because it's worked for a reason. It was made for a reason. So I don't see it as cheating. I see it as doing what it was intended for and setting up my student for success, as long as I do take time at the very beginning, in the middle, at the end to add in the original text so they hear it. Because they have to hear the iambic pentameter to understand parts of it.
Yeah, it's so beautiful, and they'll miss that. The person that made me kind of get rid of that guilt, have you heard of Kelly Gallagher?
A little bit.
Yeah, he's like a really well-known English teacher and writer. That first year, I read a blog post that he uses Know If You're Shakespeare, and I was like, well, if this guy can use it. And he says, basically in his blog post, he's saying, like, you know, if you're taking 8 weeks to teach a 3-hour play, like, we're doing something wrong, and they're gonna lose interest. And just like students, or, you know, even us as adults, if we're watching a movie, imagine if someone paused the movie every 2 minutes to go, okay, now this is actually what it meant. Like, that would drive us insane. And that's what students do as well.
So it's also being a strong enough teacher to know when to fight for your student and when to fight for your curriculum. Of saying, here's why you should not be doing that. And you can even pull, I mean, you have access to all the TEKs in the state. You can pull theater TEKs and say, no, this is a performance TEK that's tied to an English TEK, and no, you have to watch it in its entirety. And
even when, like, going back to translations, like, that was the thing, like, someone asked me, they were like, do the TEKs say students must know Shakespearean language? Like, that, at least, you know, that's not...
They have to understand cultural relevance. They have to be able to be exposed. They have to be able to choose on their own. And now, there's even I used to be anti-graphic novel, I will say. And then...
There's some pretty good Shakespeare ones.
Oh my gosh, there are. They are cool, too. If you find the good ones, they're really, really cool. Even Greek translations, too. I read a whole thing on Persephone. I'm like, I didn't know I would enjoy this much. So if you're able to get your hands on some of those graphic novels, and if you're able to work with students who are slightly neurodivergent or who are ADHD or dyslexic, where they do not like to read, and you get a graphic novel version in front of them, or say you've read bits and pieces, then hand it to them, then let them backtrack on their own and get to that point, they're way more invested, way more likely to stay hooked in.
For sure.
If they can have a medium that they can connect to. So yes, we want to have the original text. Yes, we want to have that structural integrity, right? We want to have the integrity of the actual piece. But to be fair, these were never meant to be published.
That's true. They were meant to be watched.
Yeah, they were. Well, people had to piece them together from other people's scripts. Like, the whole building process on its own was not how the Bard intended either. So if you want to take it for a grain of salt of the integrity of the script, just like, you know, you can only do with what you can. But if you're able to, you have to have the modern day translations.
For sure, I agree.
And if you are wanting to be holistically and not just be prepared that you're going to have kids falling asleep, you're going to have kids that are dreading your class, and where they're not going to connect to watching it later on if you haven't set up that foundation.
And if you think about it, like, Shakespeare is not just popular in America. It's studied all over the world in languages that are not English. An article called Teaching Shakespeare, the author Ben Renz, he made a really good point. He talked about in Germany that from his observations that they actually have a really good love for Shakespeare. The students don't hate it. Like, they have this love, and he was like, why is that? Why do they love it there and not here? And it was like, wait a minute. They speak German. It had to be translated into a language. And they don't translate to something complicated that they can't understand. It's very modern. And it's so, like, we don't say, oh, you don't really understand Shakespeare because you didn't read it in the original language. And so I think the same thing for us. That's a good argument.
That is a very good argument.
For a modern translation.
Yes, absolutely.
And going back, like I said, well, Shakespeare's hard for most people. But when I gave them that modern translation, I had students who typically would never, ever read out loud. Just because of the excitement and the building of Shakespeare, all of a sudden they were volunteering and begging me to read. Can I read the part today?
I have people fighting over rules. I'm like, wait, and they're like, I want to. I'm like, I have servant number 2 available. I'll take it. No, I'll take it. You know.
Yes.
So yes, if you can get that, you would get so much more investment from those reticent students as well with that modern translation.
And then, because like we said, Shakespeare's meant to be watched. So my thing is like, let's read modern translation. Of course, key scenes. Like there are key scenes that I know you're going to hear quoted somewhere. We're going to read them the modern. Like when I taught freshmen, we keep talking about Romeo and Juliet, but that's what we taught freshmen. You know, that balcony scene. You have to know the beautiful language. But anyway, and then when they watch it, it's so much easier to understand it because they've seen it. Even before, if I'm going to go watch a Shakespeare play, I'm going to like look at a SparkNotes version just to refresh my memory real quick of what happens.
And there's so much artistic liberty too that if they change any of it, whether it be the staging or the gender switches as well, or the costume changes or what time period it's in, you need to know before you go. So that definitely makes sense.
Are you a fan of the Leonardo DiCaprio version of Romeo and Juliet?
My dear friend is, and she would absolutely just drag me through the mud for saying this, but no, I don't like it.
My favorite.
I don't like that one. I just don't, because sometimes they speak so quickly that the students can't keep up with it. I can't keep up with it.
Yes.
Since it's a modern day everything but the language, parts of it are great. I love it that their swords are actually guns and they have quotes on them, but also they, like, Juliet wakes up before Leo's dead, and I'm just like, that didn't happen. That's not, no. And, you know, and that's what gets my students all hyped up, but it's not my favorite. It's done so much, and I know that technically at that age group, at that 9th grade age group,
I think it's the best for them.
They need it.
They're like,
I taught 12th night one year, and they thought that was wild too. I almost think that would be better for a sophomore related. But a lot of people are like, oh, it's so hard to teach comedy. I'm like, it's all in how you approach it.
Yeah.
I love Hamlet, but that's reserved for like seniors.
I always wanted to teach Hamlet.
Yeah. And I mean, I think Julius Caesar should be more for seniors because, but yet they teach it to sophomores.
That's such a hard buy-in for that one.
Yes.
I was the year I was teaching sophomores. That was the one thing I was dreading. I was like, oh, don't make me teach. It's one of my. I don't know. It's a good play, but I was like, I don't know how to. You know, get them. It's harder to get them invested. Okay, so to conclude this big Shakespeare topic, or our little section of the Shakespeare that we're talking about, let's give teachers some specific things that they can do in their classrooms. For example, what I would do, I went on Amazon and I bought like little foam swords. And the first day I was like, hey, if you read today, you're in a fight scene, I'll give you a sword. And I thought it was so silly, but they were like, oh, really? And they'd get a sword and like, it was foam, so they could like hit each other with it, you know? And that, they really were excited to come to class and to pick a part that had, they're like, does this guy have a fight scene today? Things like that. So what would you do, like practical things to advice to give teachers to do?
Great. So Teachers Pay Teachers has a lot of great resources, and you can scaffold them. My best friend. I know. Thank goodness. I mean, there's been a couple days where I'm just like, why don't I have anything? Oh no, you know, so especially new teachers too. But they have this foldable globe that each piece kind of stacks on top of each other, and you can decorate the outside, but it has information about it. It has fill in the blank activity. It has, these are the parts of the stage. So anything that can help them with the atmosphere part and the history part, those being tangible would be great. Also, like, I stop and talk about like the colors of the flags that are flown above, and then I would have a flag, even if it's just drawn on my whiteboard. I would have it out there, and they're like, wait, black flag, who's gonna die? You know, like,
that's great.
You gotta add in the drama somewhere. So try to incorporate it into your classroom. Maybe even have a playlist. There's loads of playlists out there. Maybe you can have it playing as they walk in or during their independent time. If you can, like, just make an immersive situation.
Room transformations are the best.
Yes. And they can be low cost. Drawing on your board, playing music, those are low cost things, but with a bigger impact. Change up your classroom reading style. So like, make it theater in the round, where they're all a round table situation where they're all having to read, or make them act it out, ask them to act it out, or have a student director do it. But also, depending on the timing of the year, get those free resources from the Globe Theater. There's loads of free YouTubes out there.
Free resources. Reduce Shakespeare Company. They'll do the whole play in like 12 minutes.
Even locally, like, there's Shakespeare in the Park. partner with your local or even your school theater department. Try to do as much cross-curricular things as you can. Plan ahead as much as you can. Get your whole department involved. But really spend time and find a recording that you like, that you wouldn't mind watching a couple of times. If you have 7 classes in a day, find one that you can tolerate 7 times over. But also there's so many different stagings of it and different ways that they put different genders in it and different, like if you were doing 12th night and then you watch She's the Man or whatnot, like find as many variety pieces as you can to make it as multifaceted as possible. Even take it outside. Like move around and give them different elements.
And I think it's neat because we have so many different versions of like the plays recorded. It's just interesting to give students like different views on their different interpretations of the text, because we all read one thing, but we all have our own life experiences that we bring to interpret it and things like that.
Yeah, even scavenger hunts where like let the student help themselves, also help you because you can kind of take a step back, but add it in with like some of the globe, because they have like a 3D thing where you can move the stage around and the theater around, and then it'll give you facts as you go. You can try making it more immersive.
Yeah, like escape rooms.
Yes,
those are really fun.
Oh my gosh. Too. Yes,
and especially if you can buy them pre-made, they're extra fun because they are pretty hard to make, but they're really fun. My last year I taught Romeo and Juliet. I created a crime scene. I had my husband come in after school one day and I like taped
him out,
taped his body of the two, and I like melted a blue Jolly Rancher to make it look like poison, had a fake bloody knife. Anyway, so they walked in and they were like, what is going on, you know? And so we read the prologue, and then even though it says, you know, like they take their life, but I was like, but who do y'all think is responsible? And they really got into it, and they were like inferencing and all these things, like high level things that wouldn't have happened if we'd have just jumped into it. And so I think all of the extra activities can be really fun in helping students engaged,
and it can be a variety for the teacher to help prevent that burnout,
reading
to
every
be
day.
able to spice things up a little bit, make it more enjoyable for them, especially if they're hesitant about it. So I would say lean on your resources, lean on those fun different activities, change it up a little bit. Even just moving your classroom around can have a whole different feeling for the teacher and for the student.
For sure.
So as much as that is able to be woven in, and then later on you can even incorporate, like say you need to have another learning day or a light day towards the holidays and you watch Dead Poet Society. Well, there's that whole piece where the brilliant Robin Williams is there, but he's also acting it out. He's adding voices to it. So if there's no way to add that different variety to it, it falls flat.
For sure.
But then that way they can be like, oh, I know that part, or is that Shakespeare, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's good to like take little breaks like that. I know the last time I taught Shakespeare, I like decided instead of like waiting until the end to show the film, I would start to show like, okay, we read Act 1, let's watch Act 1. And it just, it was good for me as a break to like, because it's a lot.
Yeah,
you have to be really on top of it to engage students. But it also helped them, it cemented it. And there's actually been a lot of research done, they took a class, and I think it was Hamlet that they were reading, and they said, okay, this first act we're just going to read it and do a close read analysis, like the old style, and then we're going to give a test on it. And they did one where they read like a graphic novel version of the act and then give a test on that, and one where they like watched it and things like that. And the students scored the best on the ones that they were able to watch. And then I think the second highest was a graphic novel.
They actually have where they've made the acts into comic strips. So if you need to add that component as well, you can. You can even make that like your little bell ringer as they walk in.
An assignment. Storyboard that is really fun for that.
Yes, absolutely. I even, so the day that it was the big death scene, I wore all black. So like change up your own style too. Change up your own style. If you can get more invested, and it can honestly be fake it till you make it, because eventually you will start feeling better about it.
Especially if you're a first year, that's so stressful. Like just do what you can, but like you can build on it every year. Well, we've covered a lot today. Thank you so much for joining me.
It was a pleasure being here.
And as I always say, to all of our ELAR friends, may your lesson plans be strong, but your coffee be stronger. Cheers.